A member of a large Unitarian church in Florida flew up here a few years ago to attend one of our conferences we held with Bishop John Shelby Spong. And he was sufficiently impressed that he wanted us to just repeat the entire conference at their church in Florida. He paid to have Bishop Spong and me and 3 of our musicians come down to reenact the 3-day event. I got the impression that there must have been some in-house political battles around the whole thing. The minister was distinctly not glad to have us there, and there was his inner circle of the minister's power coterie that was trying to make us all feel as uncomfortable as they possibly could. But as we were getting ready for the opening that Friday night, there was a book table in the back where Bishop Spong's books and my books were, and there was a lady there in charge of that, and the musicians were getting set up on stage, and Paul Tomlinson was tuning his guitar. And the elderly lady next to me said, "I hate this kind of music." And I said, you know, they're not playing a song, they're tuning their instruments. And she said, "I just know I'm going to hate this." And you know, I don't doubt that she did. It was obviously her goal to hate it, and so I'm sure she accomplished that. But there's a saying in AA you've heard me quote before: hurt people hurt people. You've heard me in years past refer to an incident that is cut deep in my memory from my childhood when me and the neighborhood gang were playing baseball in the backyards in our subdivision. And you heard squealing tires and the yelp of a dog, and we knew one of our pets was involved, and we all ran over to the busy country road that went by our neighborhood. And sure enough, there was my friend's white Spitz with bright red blood on his white fur, and he reached down to pick him up, and the dog tried to bite him. And then we all tried to reassure the dog that we wanted to help it, but it viciously snapped and snarled at anyone that came near it. Hurt people hurt people. When you are in pain, you are likely to lash out, even when it is completely irrational to do so, even towards the people that you are trying to help. I actually saw a meme on social media recently that quoted Plato as having said, "Be kind, for everyone you meet is fighting a harder battle." Now, you're not going to hear me refer to my degree in philosophy very often. That was long enough ago that I don't claim great expertise in that area, but I can tell you this with absolute professional certainty: Plato never said that or anything like that. He was not that kind of guy. Still, in spite of the attribution being completely silly, it's not a bad idea, really, because everyone you encounter is probably fighting a harder battle than you know. Some of the meanest, most irrational, hostile people in the world are battling against old wounds that you probably know nothing about, and about which they may not be conscious themselves. I am sure that woman at that book table was just righteously letting me know that our music was just not going to be any good. And I knew different, and there wasn't any sense in fighting about it. I don't doubt that in that instance in that Florida sanctuary that we had just unwittingly walked into a church battle that we didn't know anything about and didn't want to know anything about and didn't want to get soiled with. But the other thing I can say with absolute certainty, and there's not a lot in the world of psychology you can be sure of, but I am sure of this: that woman was in pain. Something had really hurt her. Paul, Barry, Sean, and I were not being paid to be there. They did send us plane tickets and put us up in a beach house while you all were fighting a February winter, so it was a pretty good deal. But it wasn't like our careers or our income was in any way on the line. We were there just trying to be nice. And she and a few of her friends were determined to bite us in response to our being nice to them. Now, some other time, I might have thrown down the gauntlet and given her a taste of her own medicine. But you see, a lot of time in those sorts of social frictions, there's nothing to fight about. We weren't going to come back. It was a one-off thing. They did ask us to come back, and I said, when you get a new minister, I'll consider it. That was sort of where I left that one. But just because someone wants to pick a fight with you doesn't mean that you have to lower yourself to get involved in that battle. It would be easy to dislike someone like that just on the face of it because of her behavior. But I try to remember this quote from Emile Autumn's novels where she writes, "You," he said, "are a terribly real thing in a terribly false world. And that, I believe, is why you are in so much pain. Some of the people who just don't fit in for good reasons. It's not their fault. It could be that they are just so different from their surroundings that they don't fit in. But it's not something you put on your resume to be well adjusted to a sick society. So if you don't fit in, maybe that's actually a good thing." Now, I do want to make the point that I tell stories about things that happen in other churches when I'm speaking out of state. That's not because we don't have examples within our congregation. It's that I'm smart enough to know that I live here, and so you don't create sermon illustrations out of frictions you've had in your own hometown. But let me give you one more vignette. I'd been invited to speak at a church on the East Coast shortly after the publication of my 2014 book, Progressive Faith and Practice. And so that I would have more of a chance to talk about the book, they asked if I would speak in an adult class before the service where I was going to preach. So I did. I agreed to that. And the guy who ran the class, and this is fairly common in Unitarian churches where everybody wants to talk. So the guy that ran the class has a stopwatch. And the first person gets to speak for 2 minutes, and that's it. And then everyone else in the class gets 2 minutes before anyone can speak again. Well, I had a 16-chapter book, and I had to present that in 2 minutes. And then everyone that spoke after me was asking me questions, but the moderator would not allow me to answer until everyone in the room had had their 2 minutes. So I was frustrated, like this, I kept saying, this doesn't make sense. And he's like, these are the rules, click. He was obviously really enjoying the power that he had over me, that it was his way to assert his importance by cutting me down in public to a public that I didn't know. I mean, I was in the area for another reason and had been invited to speak there by some of our listeners, but it was bizarre. So I was frustrated enough that I thought, I don't really need this. I know I can find people who love me. So I thought about just leaving, but I was encouraged to stay. I preached in the service, and it went very well. I was very warmly greeted by the congregation in the exact opposite way that I was treated in the class. But after everyone had stood in line for a long time for me to sign books or to shake my hand, then the guy that ran the class rolled up in his chair right at the end and said, "Well, it wasn't too bad, preacher. I only fell asleep once." Of course, it was for the whole sermon. And I said, "Yeah, he rolled up because he was in a wheelchair. He was wheelchair bound by a neurological disease that was killing him. And it was evident that he was mad at the whole world. And I really was nothing to him but a new audience. It was someone he hadn't had the opportunity to insult yet. And so I just accepted, I'm fresh meat for this guy, but there is no reason to get involved in a fight." Sometimes you have no idea. His wheelchair was a good tip-off for me, but sometimes you have absolutely no idea what's going on in someone's life, the thorn that they live with in their soul. We always tend to take these things very personally, when in fact, it's almost never about you. It really isn't. People start fights with you, pick fights with you, and they may put your name on it, they may direct it at you, but I'm just encouraging you to reflect on the fact that it's probably not about you. It's probably about them. Several of us gather most Monday evenings at Emmy's restaurant, Galloway Station, to listen to an Irish band play exactly the same songs that they have played every Monday for a decade now. But I look around the room in this city where I've lived for almost 30 years now, and I know that the elderly chap by the stage used to be a Catholic priest who was defrocked for molesting children. I know the surgeon over in the corner lost his medical license for a careless death in a trauma surgery. I know the woman at the other side of the restaurant who was a member of my former parish who never attended a board meeting that she didn't deliver a dagger to my back, just got out of a mental hospital where she was locked in a padded cell for 6 months. I know so many of the demons. You know, you do pastoral counseling in a small city for 30 years. I don't look around and see a room full of people singing Irish songs. I'm more like that little boy in The Sixth Sense who was cursed with always seeing dead people. I look around a room and I can see the open wounds and bruises from past affairs, chronic depression, mental illness, addiction. Because folks, whether you know it or not, and I've lived here and been a pastoral counselor long enough that I know a lot of the stories, but just assume that you are surrounded by the walking wounded, that most of us are fighting battles that you have no idea how heavy they really are. The poet Charles Bukowski sums it up in a brutally frank way, the way that Germans do, and he was a German American. He said, "We're all going to die, all of us. What a circus. That alone should make us love each other, but it doesn't. We are terrorized and flattened by trivialities. We are eaten up by nothing." Now, I like to think of myself as being a pretty good guy. If you see me otherwise, keep it to yourself, please. But there are people that I have just come to avoid contact with because I don't have unlimited supplies of emotional energy. And in spite of how I appear, I am not actually a saint. But there are people who are so insecure, so racked with feelings of inadequacy, that they feel the need to put down and insult anyone who raises their anxieties about themselves. There are people who simply lack the social skill to know how to engage in a conversation without lacing it with completely unnecessary, eviscerating personal insults that they then try to masquerade as humor. I find it nearly impossible to keep giving these repeat offenders another and another and another chance. But what was it Jesus said about 70 times 7? Now, none of us are ever going to get this right every time. Sometimes when someone is just trying to push your buttons, lo and behold, your buttons get pushed. I just hope that you will remember that thinking of a witty comeback or an eviscerating insult in response is not always the best way to deal with it. The world is not short on hostile insults, but the world is really bereft of kindness. The problem is that none of us are natural-born saints. We have to practice kindness to ever get to be good at it, for it to be our first choice under pressure. You learn to sing by singing. You learn to dance by dancing. You learn to ride a bike by riding a bike. You learn how to be kind by practicing kindness, sometimes in very small ways. I'm suggesting that we practice it in the very little ways so that we will know how to do it when a challenging opportunity presents itself. I love this meme for its specificity, suggesting that you think, tip your server, return your shopping cart in the parking lot, pick up a piece of trash that you didn't drop, hold the door open for the person that's coming in behind you. And for goodness sakes, Ozarkers, let somebody in your lane. Your house is not on fire. Just be patient enough to show someone some consideration. You know, especially these days, we are all mad about what's going on in the world of politics. We are all hurt. We are all disappointed. We've all got things that just cut and needle us. We're frustrated by the slow progress of trying to end racism, making health care, housing, education, and retirement available to everyone. We're exhausted by the constant controversy and the now endless cycles of elections. We are never not in an election cycle. But would it kill you to lighten up a little bit and just make a choice to be kind to the people that you encounter in the course of the day? One of my favorite stories is about an American nun who was working in the jungles of Nicaragua during the Sandinista War, the Contra War. With the Sandinistas were trying to defend their country against yet another cloaked American invasion. You know, we've invaded them 4 times in the last century. Surprising that you can go to Nicaragua and get out alive. But every night, this nun was working with a group of women up in the mountains in Matagalpa, and every night she went to her tent alone and worked on the medical records of the children they were taking care of, writing newspaper articles, trying to send letters for fundraising. But while she was working, the other women in the camp were singing and dancing by the campfire. And over time, she realized that the other women never spoke to her, that they distinctly disliked her and were rude to her whenever they could be. And she was thinking, I'm a volunteer, I'm a nun, I'm devoted to a life of chastity and poverty and prayer and service. What's not to like? So finally, she confronted one of the more hostile women in the camp and demanded an explanation. And the old woman said, we don't like you because you refuse to sing and dance with us. You're here for a little while. You'll burn out. You'll get tired of it. You'll go back to your comfort in the United States. We'll still be here, and the war will still be going on. So if you don't love us enough to sing and dance with us, we don't love you at all. We have deadly serious issues ahead of us, folks. We have hard and important work to do to help save the world. But along the way, it wouldn't kill you to show some kindness, or to sing an Irish drinking song surrounded by people who are broken and hurting and who just don't know how they're going to make it if someone doesn't find it in their hearts to be kind to them in that moment.
Thank you for watching our videos. We are entirely dependent on the donations of our listeners and members. We hope that you find this content to be important enough to help us to keep offering these videos to the public at no charge by becoming a regular contributor. Please click on the donate button on our website at www.spfccc.org. Thank you for your support of progressive religious programming.